Hi guys, my name is Dr. Whitney Kosters and I'm an English professor. And here on my channel, I break down the parts of literature, writing, and research that a lot of students are usually just expected to figure out on their own. So if filling that gap would be helpful for you, be sure to subscribe for lectures that are going to help you understand what to do and how to do it. Today, I'm going to talk about a mistake that almost everyone, and I truly do mean almost everyone, makes the first time they write a real research paper. Here's what happens. A student finds strong sources, takes notes, starts drafting, and then starts giving each source its own paragraph. This article says this, that article says that, and this researcher found something else. The result is a paper that may be well researched, but feels like a tour of sources instead of a clear, developed argument. This is really crucial to recognize because it means you can spend all this time doing real work and finding and using credible research and still never achieving real synthesis if your paper is organized by source instead of by idea. So in this lecture, I'm going to show you how to fix this common mistake because it really is one of the clearest differences between a paper that sounds assembled and one that is genuinely thoughtful. Ironically, the main reason this kind of organization happens is because students are actually trying to be careful. Once they have a set of sources, it feels logical to move through them one at a time, almost like they're just showing their work. They don't want to leave anything out, and they don't want to misrepresent anything, and they want to make sure each source is acknowledged. But that instinct surprisingly creates a structural problem because the organizing question becomes, what does this source say? Then what does the next source say? Instead of, what does my reader need to understand at this point in the argument? Now, that shift in question is where the paper either starts to build or completely weaken. When the paper is organized by source, the structure is being controlled by the note pile. The order of the paragraphs reflects the order of the articles or the order in which they were read, rather than the order in which the ideas need to unfold. This is exactly why these drafts often feel very repetitive. Each paragraph restarts around a new source instead of extending the same line of thought. So, even when the information is good, a paper can feel like it's moving sideways instead of forward. In contrast, a stronger paper works the other way around in that the ideas determine the structure and the sources are used inside that structure. Now that sounds really simple, but it actually changes the role of everything in the paper. Instead of asking where to place a source, the writer asks, well, what point needs to be made, and then brings in evidence that helps develop that point. And so the paragraph exists because the argument needs it, not because the source does. So let me show you what this looks like in practice. So imagine a paper about rising tuition at public universities. The draft opens with a paragraph on declining state funding, then moves to a paragraph on administrative growth, then one on student debt, and then one on enrollment pressure. On paper, this can look very reasonable. The topic is consistent, the sources are credible, and every paragraph is related to the general subject. But that structure is still too tied to the articles themselves. So let's take that same material and reorganize it by idea. One section focuses on long-term reductions in public funding. Another examines how institutional spending and administrative expansion affect costs. And another shows how those pressures are shifted onto students through tuition increases and debt. Now the structure reflects the argument. Multiple sources can appear in each section, but they are working together to explain the same point. So the paper is no longer moving article to article, but rather moving idea to idea. And this is what makes synthesis possible. Synthesis is not just putting two citations next to each other. It's using different sources to build one point, where each one contributes something distinct. One source might establish scale, another might explain cause, another might show a limitation or complication. When each paragraph is built around a single source, that kind of interaction rarely happens. The sources stay separate. But when the paragraph is built around an idea, the sources begin to interact, and that is where the paper starts to feel more advanced. This also explains why students often receive feedback that their paper needs better organization, even when the paragraphs themselves are very clear. The issue is not always sentence level writing. It's that a paper does not yet have architecture. The parts are there, but they're not arranged according to the logic of the claim, but rather to the order of the sources. The thing is, relevance alone is not enough. The paper has to be structured so that each section builds on the one before it. So, how do you actually do this when you're planning or revising? You start with your thesis and you say it in plain language so that you know exactly what you're arguing. Then ask yourself, what does the reader need to understand for this to feel convincing? Usually, that question will give you 2 or 3 main ideas, which will become your sections. Next, go back to your research and place your sources under those ideas. And remember that not all sources will be used the same way. Some may support one section and others may appear in more than one place, and that is totally fine. In fact, it's often a sign that you're using your research more flexibly because you're no longer treating each source as something that needs its own space. You're treating it as something that can be used where it's actually useful. As you write, begin your paragraphs with the idea and not with the author. If your topic sentences keep starting with names, that's a sign that the paper is still being organized by source. So try starting with the point instead, and then bring the source in to support it. That change alone can shift the entire feel of the paper because now the paragraph is doing conceptual work instead of just reporting information. Here's a simple test that you can use when you revise. Mentally remove the author names and citations and then look at the structure of the paper. Do you still see a clear progression of ideas, or does the paper only make sense because each paragraph is tied to a different source? If the structure disappears when the sources disappear, the paper probably was not organized yet. You can also ask yourself what each paragraph is there to do. Not what sources it includes, but what role it plays in the argument. If the answer is just that it explains an article, that's not enough. But if the answer is that it establishes a cause, clarifies a distinction, or shows a consequence, then the paragraph is doing real work. There are times when one source may need more attention, especially if it's central to your argument, but even then, the paragraph should exist because your argument needs it, not because the source does. So the main idea I want to leave you with is this. Do not, under any circumstances, build your paper by moving from source to source. Build it by moving from idea to idea. Then use your sources where they help develop those ideas. That's what turns a paper from a set of summaries into a real piece of reasoning. This will be especially helpful if you're writing a timed exam too, because it gives you a strategy, structure, and ultimately success. As always, thank you so much for joining me here today. I do hope it was very helpful. If it was, be sure to check out my other videos on research writing, report writing, evidence, revision, literary analyses, and more, because all of these skills connect and build on one another. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Be well.